for those of us who follow, search and seizure law, this is where the Supreme Court actually gets on the same page and says, hey, government, you cannot do this. And so it's important that we recognize them. It's important that we fight for these guys who are having their rights violated, because ultimately that's the only way that we all stay safe from the government itself. We are the Arms Attorneys. Today we're talking about some pretty egregious violations committed by some game wardens against a gun owner, and talk about how your Fourth Amendment rights are being constantly eroded day by day. Before we get started, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting the like button. And today's episode is brought to you by our friends at SDI. If you're interested in learning something new, gunsmithing, armor courses, so much more, check them out, sdi.edu/armed-attorneys. Today's episode is also brought to you by Hartford Gold.
As part of the firearms community, one lesson's clear. Relying on the government for protection, whether it's your life or wealth, is not smart. And unfortunately, the current state of affairs is not ideal. With soaring inflation, major economies abandoning the dollar, bank failures, and talks of a government control through the digital dollar.
Having a plan to safeguard your life savings from failing corporations and currency conflicts is crucial. That's where American Hartford Gold comes in, a precious metal dealer we trust. They can guide you in diversifying your wealth portfolio with physical gold and silver. They offer incredible products, customer service, and have a 5-star rating with thousands of reviews and an A+ from the Better Business Bureau. On top of that, they support the channel and have an incredible offer to share.
When you contact American Hartford Gold, tell them that the Armed Attorney sent you, and they'll give you up to $5,000 of free silver on your first order. To learn more, text attorney to 65532 or call 866-856-2380 or check out the link in the description below. And so what we're talking about is Josh Highlander. He lives out in rural Virginia. He lives on 30 acres, set up some trail cameras, and his wife kind of had this startling discovery, saw somebody in camo, thought maybe, hey, this is a lost hunter. But whenever they started investigating into this, they found that, their trail cameras were no longer responding, and so they went to go investigate it. Josh went and reported it to local police, who informed him that they were in the custody of the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources.
So it turns out what we had here was the warrantless confiscation of his property, of cameras on his 30 acres, which, look, I live in the suburbs on, a quarter acre. If I had 30 acres, I feel like I've bought that so as not to be disturbed.
Yeah, no, exactly right.
Don't come on my property, man. And so not only do we have these incursions onto his property, but we have a warrantless confiscation of cameras. And I think that there's this little sense that game wardens have that they're basically invincible, which they are here in Texas, they are the most powerful police in Texas. There's no question.
Yeah, and this stems from, we have what's called the open fields doctrine, which is an exception to the general warrant requirement under the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment guards or restrains the government from unreasonable search and seizures, but the Supreme Court and the courts have made so many exceptions that really doesn't make, it looks like Swiss cheese at this point. And one of those exceptions is open fields, which is basically saying, hey, this isn't a giant, vast piece of land. There isn't an expectation of privacy. Therefore, a search of this area wouldn't necessarily need a warrant to search this area. But what makes this a little bit different, and with game wardens especially, they're given a little bit of leeway because the courts know, hey, you're out in the middle of nowhere. You don't have time to go get a warrant. These things that are kind of instinctive, but we now have access to the internet all over the place. So, and I know you can call in a warrant from virtually anywhere. So I think that argument's kind of going away. But we're talking about the seizure of property and not just searching.
No, yes, the seizure of property. And there are lots of states in which the game wardens actually have heightened searchability. So again, I'll use Texas as an example, but this is not unusual. They can search on reasonable suspicion alone. Most of the time you need probable cause if you have to commit a warrantless search. Reasonable suspicion alone, they can search for basically anything that could be a fish and game violation, right? A tool thereof, or a wildlife resource that you took that you weren't supposed to take. But again, a camera is neither of those things. So let's just assume that Virginia has the same sort of law.
Yeah, because I bet they do, because a lot of states do this. But this is where the authority gets pushed to the limit. Well, hiding a fish and game resource, that might be kind of a large container. But if the tools to accomplish hunting and fishing, well, that could be a fishing hook and an Altoids can. So, I mean, we're talking the ability to search virtually any container by game wardens, which is pretty crazy. Now, how does that translate into, I mean, I don't know that we're hiding game inside of a camera. I
No,
don't know that we're hiding lures or hooks or bullets or anything inside of these
no.
cameras. Where do the game wardens get off thinking that they can seize this stuff?
Exactly. In the words of our law partner, they're kicking the guts out of the Fourth Amendment.
That's
You
right.
cannot do that. You cannot do that. You need a warrant, and warrants are not difficult to get upon probable cause. And this is why I think this is so important. And Richard and I were talking about this earlier off camera. Most Fourth Amendment violations committed against the government are committed against bad people. No one feels like that much of a winner when you get a warrant suppressed when someone was like a big time drug dealer or a human trafficker, or, the police do something warrantless and you get that information suppressed.
Right.
But this is like, this is the police committing the violations against good people. And so this is where we fight, I think.
Yeah, and I will say it's pretty unusual to have, I mean, because this ultimately amounts to warrantless surveillance as well. I mean, they're going to seize cameras. What are the chances they're not going to look at what's on the cameras?
Exactly.
I mean, this amounts to warrantless surveillance of otherwise law-abiding gun owners. And, this is the opportunity that we have to maybe rein in and assert the Fourth Amendment. I mean, we're always pushing on the Second Amendment, make sure the government doesn't infringe on our right to keep and bear arms. But the Fourth Amendment is just as important. And I think this is a great time to point out, like you said, when a drug dealer, we suppress a kilo of cocaine, drug dealer walks, nobody's, jumping up and down, I guess. But this is one of those opportunities because, I mean, we see the government getting out of control all over the place. The IRS raiding gun stores. We see more or less surveillance in this case. I mean, you got to draw the line somewhere.
The government, I mean, the more power the government gets, the more they want to take. The government's never going to rein itself in. And, believe it or not, when cases like this actually make it to the Supreme Court, we get unanimous decisions. I mean, that's where, we think of the Supreme Court, we think of cases like Bruin, we think of, 5-4 decisions. I mean, really, really hotly contested, politically divided decisions. For those of us who follow search and seizure law, this is where the Supreme Court actually gets on the same page and says, hey, government, you cannot do this. And so it's important that we recognize them. It's important that we fight for these guys who are having their rights violated, because ultimately that's the only way that we all stay safe from the government itself.
Yeah, and I think another kind of side pro tip or a lesson we can glean from all of this is that maybe our cameras are going to be used against us.
Yes.
This wasn't the government getting a warrant, putting up a telephone pole, surveilling somebody. We see those in cases. This was the government turning a person's own camera on themselves. And I talk to clients all the time who, maybe they're involved in a self-defense incident. They say, hey, it was, all captured on video. I'm going to hand this over to the police. And it's like, well, pump the brakes. We need to look at this thing first, because you have no idea, what you perceive and what's on the camera might be misaligned. We don't want to paint you like a liar.
Exactly. I mean, not only have we had cases where the camera doesn't show what our client thinks it shows, because there's lots of adrenaline dump and all sorts of things going on in your body. And I'll say, the case I just tried, they confiscated someone else's Ring doorbell video camera of my client after the incident. Did not show anything that happened, but they tried to paint him as a monster in front of the jury because he looked calm as he smoked a cigarette as he was waiting for police to arrive.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll use anything against you. Anything can be used against you.
And so this is one of those, almost like snitching on yourself. Maybe you have make sure the cameras are pointed in a safe direction. But we hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video.
And as always, question and comment for us below. Until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.